Okay, so you know that whole thing about a butterfly flapping its wings and causing a hurricane halfway across the world? Well, that's what we're diving into today. We're talking about the Beirut explosion back in 2020 and how this whole chain of events, like years before, led up to that awful day.
Yeah, it's one of those things that really makes you think, about cause and effect and how we think things are straightforward,
But they're really not.
right, like the butterfly effect reminds us that it's way more complicated than that.
Exactly. And the article you sent, it does a great job laying it all out.
Yeah.
So August 4th, 2020, that's when it happened.
Right.
Huge explosion rips through Beirut's port. Total devastation. Hundreds of people died, thousands injured. Just awful. One of the biggest non-nuclear explosions ever.
Yeah.
And what's crazy is this whole thing can be traced back, like the article does, to 2013, a ship called the MV Rosas. So picture this.
Yeah.
This ship, loaded with over 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate.
Which, by the way, is usually used in fertilizer.
Right, but it's also super explosive if it's not handled right. Anyway, this ship, it gets stuck in Beirut's port.
Yeah.
That's our first butterfly flap right there.
It's like that first little flutter. Seems insignificant at the time, right? But it sets this whole chain reaction in motion.
Totally. So you got this ship full of potentially dangerous stuff, stuck in port. What happens next?
Well, for a bunch of reasons, and we'll get into those, it never left.
Just stayed there.
Pretty much. And that's when those what-ifs start piling up.
Yeah.
See, the ship itself, the MV Rosas, it was kind of a mess from the get-go, and the ammonium nitrate, it wasn't even supposed to be in Beirut for that long.
He's just passing through, right, on its way to.
Exactly. But things changed, and they ended up unloading it, storing it in a warehouse at the port, and get this, it was improperly stored, and it sat there for over 6 years.
6 years. That's not just like an oversight. That's years of this ticking time bomb, basically.
Right in the middle of the city.
And the thing is, people knew. The article makes that really clear. Customs officials, port authorities, they knew how dangerous it was. They sent warnings, even wrote letters begging someone, anyone, to do something about it, sell it, move it, anything.
But nothing happened. Those warnings, they just went ignored.
Which is insane when you think about ammonium nitrate.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like it's going to just explode on its own, but store that much of it in a poorly ventilated space. Expose it to years of changing temperatures, humidity. It's a disaster waiting to happen.
Like, you've got a gas leak, but you just hope it'll fix itself.
You would never do that in your own home.
No way.
And this is where the butterfly effect goes from like a cool concept to something terrifyingly real.
Because it makes you think, what went wrong? What were the breakdowns in communication that led to those warnings being ignored for so long?
And it's not just one big thing, it's all these small decisions that add up.
Right. Each ignored warning, each time they put it off.
Right.
It's like another flap of the butterfly's wings, pushing things closer and closer to the edge.
It's easy to focus on that ship and the ammonium nitrate and all that, but the article does a really good job of reminding us there's a whole other side to this story. Like, to really get what happened in Beirut, we got to look at the bigger picture. Lebanon itself.
Right. It's like you were saying before, it's all connected.
Exactly.
And the article, it talks about how Lebanon was already dealing with so much before the explosion.
Oh, absolutely. By 2020, Lebanon was really on edge. I mean, you had all this political instability, different factions constantly at odds. The government was basically paralyzed.
It sounds like a mess.
It really was. And on top of that, the economy was in shambles. People were struggling to even afford basic stuff. And then, like, you needed another layer to this whole thing. There was just this overwhelming feeling of corruption everywhere. Like, no one in charge was really looking out for the people.
So the whole country was like a tinderbox, ready to go up.
That's a perfect way to put it. Like, given everything going on, the explosion almost seems inevitable in hindsight. And that's what's so powerful about the butterfly effect, Sometimes it's not just one butterfly, it's like a whole bunch of them all flapping at once, creating these ripples that just keep getting bigger and bigger.
Eventually, you get a hurricane.
Exactly.
So you've got this really volatile situation, this powder keg that is Lebanon, and then you've got the fuse, that ammonium nitrate just sitting there. And then August 4th, 2020 hits.
The day everything changed.
The article doesn't really go into what actually started the fire that set off the ammonium nitrate.
But we may never know.
Right, but whatever it was,
The result was devastating.
that's putting it mildly. The explosion was huge, like on par with a small nuclear bomb. I remember seeing the news footage. It was just unbelievable. Buildings completely leveled, the port gone. And then the human cost, Just awful. Over 200 people dead, thousands injured. And we can't forget about the lasting impact on the survivors, the trauma, the displacement. Those scars run deep.
And even in the aftermath, you see the butterfly effect at work again. Like the government was already struggling, and then they had to deal with this massive disaster.
They were in way over their head.
It was chaos. The article talks about how people were angry, and rightfully so. They were already hurting, and then this happens, and the government didn't have a good response. It was just like...
the last straw.
Exactly. And again, the butterfly effect helps explain why. It wasn't just about the physical damage, the buildings and all that. It was this deep-seated frustration, this anger at a system that had failed them over and over again.
And that anger, it didn't just go away. The article mentions these huge protests that broke out after the explosion. People demanding answers, accountability.
The breaking point.
It's like the explosion, as horrific as it was, it exposed just how fragile things were in Lebanon, how close to the edge everyone was. It's scary to think about, right? Like, if this happened in Beirut, could it happen somewhere else? Are there other places just waiting for something like this to happen?
I mean, that's kind of the point of the butterfly effect, isn't it? It reminds us that things are connected in ways we don't always see. There are these hidden risks everywhere, and we don't even know it. And then something small happens. And
boom.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not about saying, oh, we should have seen this coming. It's more like, okay, now we know this is possible.
Yeah.
What can we do about it? How can we be more aware so maybe we can prevent something like this from happening again?
Right. The butterfly effect isn't about predicting the future. It's about understanding how things are connected and using that knowledge to make better decisions, you know, to make systems that can handle these kinds of shocks.
So what can we actually do? The article doesn't really give us any easy answers.
It's a tough one.
But it does feel like it's telling us we need to do something.
Yeah, it's definitely a call to action. It's like it's challenging us to think differently about risk. Like, what are those potential ammonium nitrate situations that are already out there in our own communities even? And what are we doing to fix them?
It's like that saying, right? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Exactly. Because a lot of times it's the small stuff that we ignore, you know? Those little problems we don't want to deal with because it's easier to just look the other way. But those are the things that can lead to big problems down the line. The butterfly effect just shows us that the things we do and the things we don't do, they can have huge consequences, bigger than we can even imagine sometimes.
Wow. This deep dive has been a lot to process. In a good way.
It really makes you think.
It does. It makes you realize that we're all connected, you know, and that we all have a responsibility to understand how our actions affect the world around us and to learn from our mistakes so we can try to build a better future.
Well, that's about all the time we have for today. But this conversation has definitely given me a lot to think about. And listeners, we hope it's done the same for you. Until next time.